There are people who walk through life as if through a room full of mirrors. An empath rarely sees the world directly. First, through someone's reaction, through someone's sigh, through approval or silence. And one day, almost unnoticed, a strange dependence is born, not on people themselves, but on the feeling of being accepted by them. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest prison is the one the mind mistakes for safety. And an empath often calls this prison being good for everyone. You feel it too, don't you? That invisible tension before speaking your truth. That tiny fear of disappointing someone, as if one wrong emotion could make love disappear. An empath learns early to read faces like sacred texts. A raised eyebrow becomes danger. Coldness becomes punishment. Silence becomes rejection. Others never notice how deeply you absorb them, but your nervous system remembers everything. And so the empath begins to adapt, to soften edges, to hide storms, to become emotionally convenient, not because you are weak, because somewhere inside, a wounded child decided, if everyone is happy with me, I will finally be safe. But safety bought with self-betrayal always asks for your soul in return. The strange thing is, people praise the empath for this. You're so understanding, so easy to talk to, so kind. No one sees the exhaustion behind the smile. No one notices how many words died in your throat just to keep peace alive. And slowly, the empath forgets a terrifying question. What do I actually feel? Because life becomes performance, an endless emotional tuning to the expectations of others. Jung called this the persona, the mask created to survive society. But the longer the mask lives, the more the real self waits in darkness, whispering through anxiety, emptiness, and sudden emotional collapse. Sometimes the empath becomes addicted to approval the way others become addicted to noise. A compliment can feel like sunlight after years underground. A single criticism can destroy the entire inner world for days. And that is when you realize your self-worth was never truly yours. It was outsourced, handed to strangers, placed into the unstable hands of people who themselves do not know who they are. The empath becomes emotionally homeless, living inside the opinions of others instead of inside their own soul. There is a hidden reason empaths fear judgment so deeply. Empaths do not only hear words, they feel the energy beneath them, the disappointment, the irritation, the withdrawal. And because of this gift, criticism enters deeper than it should. But here is the painful paradox. The empath who fears rejection the most often rejects themselves first. Before others can disapprove, you silence yourself. Before conflict appears, you abandon your truth. Not consciously, almost ritualistically, like an ancient survival instinct living in your bones. One day, the empath begins to notice something unsettling. The more you seek validation, the more invisible you become to yourself. You laugh when tired, agree when uncomfortable, forgive when wounded, stay when your soul already left the room weeks ago. And people begin loving the version of you that hurts the real you. This is where the inner fracture begins. Outward peace, inner grief, but the soul always rebels eventually. Not dramatically at first, quietly, a strange emptiness, emotional numbness, sudden anger at small things, exhaustion after conversations. These are not weaknesses. These are messages from the unconscious. Jung believed the psyche fights for wholeness, and the empath's soul grows tired of being edited for other people's comfort. Something inside you begins whispering, what if my truth deserves to exist, even if someone dislikes it? The awakening often starts with disappointment. The empath finally realizes, no amount of pleasing will guarantee love. No amount of sacrifice will stop abandonment. No perfect version of yourself can control another person's emotions. And this realization is both terrifying and liberating, because for the first time you stop chasing emotional permission to exist. You begin listening inward instead of outward. And suddenly the silence inside you becomes less frightening than the noise of everyone else's expectations. An empath who stops living through the opinions of others becomes almost unrecognizable. The softness remains, but now it has boundaries. The kindness remains, but now it no longer bleeds itself dry. You stop apologizing for your intuition. Stop shrinking to fit insecure people. Stop translating your soul into something easier for others to digest. And strangely, this is when real respect begins to appear, because authenticity carries a frequency that performance never can. Maybe this entire journey was never about becoming liked. Maybe it was about remembering yourself beneath the noise. The empath was never meant to be an emotional mirror for the world. The empath was meant to become conscious, to feel deeply without drowning, to love without disappearing, to listen without obeying every voice around you. And perhaps the greatest freedom comes the moment you realize, not everyone has to understand you, for your soul to be real. The sequel begins when the empath stops asking, "Do they accept me?" and starts asking, "Why did I abandon myself for acceptance in the first place?" There comes a moment when the empath begins noticing something almost frightening. How much of life has been lived through invisible permission? Permission to speak, permission to rest, permission to disappoint someone, permission to simply exist without explaining yourself. And suddenly you see it everywhere. How your mood changes after someone's tone changes. How one disapproving glance can poison an entire day. How your nervous system becomes a puppet to energies that were never yours to carry. This is not sensitivity alone. This is emotional captivity. The empath often mistakes emotional attunement for responsibility. If someone is upset, you feel guilty. If someone withdraws, you panic. If someone misunderstands you, you immediately search for what you did wrong. But not every emotion around you is your burden to fix. Some people are uncomfortable simply because you stopped abandoning yourself for them. And this truth feels almost illegal to the empath mind. Because deep inside, you were taught that love must be earned through emotional labor. There is also a hidden loneliness inside this dependence. No one truly knows you when you constantly shapeshift to match their expectations. People know your masks, your politeness, your emotional availability, your carefully edited reactions. But the raw self, the tired self, the angry self, the self that disagrees, desires, refuses, needs space, that version often remains locked away like a secret creature in the basement of the psyche. And over time, the empath begins feeling unseen while being surrounded by people. Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious controls us from the shadows. And for many empaths, the unconscious fear sounds like this: if they dislike me, I may disappear, not physically, emotionally, as if rejection erases existence itself. This is why criticism cuts so deeply, why confrontation feels unbearable, why boundaries feel dangerous, because somewhere in your inner world, disagreement became connected to abandonment, and the body still reacts as if survival is at stake. But healing begins in strange, uncomfortable moments. The first time you say no and survive. The first time someone misunderstands you, and the world does not end. The first time you stop over-explaining your emotions. At first it feels unnatural, even cruel. The empath is so used to emotional self-sacrifice that self-respect can feel like selfishness. But your soul knows the difference. One drains life from you, the other returns you to yourself. There are people who unconsciously depend on the empath's lack of boundaries. They feel safe when you stay small, comfortable when you overgive, powerful when you constantly seek their approval. And the moment you begin reclaiming yourself, their energy changes. Some become cold. Some become distant. Some accuse you of changing. But what they truly mourn is the version of you that neglected itself to keep them comfortable. Not everyone benefits from your awakening. An empath who constantly absorbs opinions loses connection with intuition. The inner voice becomes drowned beneath external noise. What will they think? Will they approve? Am I too much? Am I enough? And eventually you stop living directly. You begin living through imagined reactions. But intuition cannot speak clearly in a crowded mind. The soul whispers, fear shouts, and for years, the empath confuses the shouting for truth. The awakening becomes irreversible when the empath finally notices exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion alone, existential exhaustion, the fatigue of performing goodness, the fatigue of managing everyone's emotions, the fatigue of shrinking your truth into acceptable pieces. You begin craving silence, distance, stillness, not because you hate people, because your nervous system is begging to hear its own voice again. And slowly, something sacred begins returning. Your preferences, your instincts, your anger, your joy without audience. You stop asking others to define your worth. Stop needing emotional applause after every decision. The empath begins understanding a profound truth. Validation is comforting, but self-abandonment is deadly to the soul. No external approval can replace inner alignment. Perhaps this is the real transformation of the empath. Not becoming colder, not becoming detached, but finally learning the difference between compassion and emotional slavery. You can love people deeply without placing your identity in their hands. You can care without collapsing. You can feel everything and still belong to yourself. And maybe the most powerful moment arrives quietly one day, when someone disapproves of you, and for the first time, your soul remains at peace anyway. There is a silent grief that follows many empaths through life. The grief of never feeling completely free to be seen as they truly are. Because every room becomes emotional weather. Every person becomes a possible mirror. And the empath keeps adjusting internally, hoping to avoid rejection before it even appears. You become fluent in invisible survival. You notice micro-expressions, changes in energy, tiny emotional shifts others ignore completely. And over time, this hyper-awareness begins to feel like identity itself. The empath often confuses harmony with love. If everyone is calm, you feel valuable. If tension appears, you feel responsible. So you become the healer, the peacemaker, the emotional translator between wounded people. But beneath this role hides a painful fear. If conflict exists, maybe I am no longer safe here. And so the empath learns to sacrifice authenticity for emotional stability. Yet a peace built on self-erasure always carries sadness inside it. There are moments when the empath suddenly feels anger rising from nowhere. Sharp, unexpected, ancient. Not because you are cruel, because the soul can only tolerate suppression for so long. Years of swallowing emotions create pressure in the unconscious. Years of pleasing create resentment the empath is often ashamed to admit. You gave energy when empty, listened while breaking inside, stayed gentle while your inner world screamed for protection. And eventually the psyche revolts, not to destroy you, to rescue you. Jung believed that whatever we reject within ourselves becomes shadow. For the empath, the shadow is often selfishness. Not real selfishness, healthy self-preservation. The ability to disappoint, to refuse, to prioritize your own emotional reality. Because somewhere along the path, you were taught that your needs disturb people, that your emotions are acceptable only when convenient, that love requires emotional obedience. And so the empath learns to disappear gracefully, smiling while vanishing internally. But the body always tells the truth eventually. Anxiety, overthinking, emotional numbness, sudden exhaustion around certain people. These are not random flaws. These are signals. The nervous system was never designed to constantly monitor the opinions of everyone around you. Yet many empaths live exactly this way, like emotional antennas trapped permanently in survival mode. Always scanning, always adjusting, always trying to stay emotionally acceptable. Then one day, a strange realization arrives. You spent so much time trying to avoid rejection that you rejected yourself first. Your desires became negotiable. Your intuition became doubted. Your boundaries became apologies. And perhaps the deepest wound of all is this: the empath often abandons themselves long before anyone else does. This is why solitude becomes sacred during awakening. Not loneliness, reconnection. In silence, the empath begins hearing forgotten truths. What actually hurts? What actually matters? Who drains you? who only loves the version of you that self-sacrifices. At first, this clarity feels brutal. You realize how many relationships were built around your emotional availability instead of mutual understanding. How many people praised your softness while benefiting from your lack of boundaries. And for the first time, you stop romanticizing your own suffering. Something changes when the empath stops chasing approval. Your energy becomes quieter, heavier, more rooted. You no longer explain every decision, no longer panic when misunderstood, no longer feel responsible for every emotional reaction around you. This confuses people, because those accustomed to your endless accommodation can feel your withdrawal from emotional servitude. But your soul finally begins breathing differently, not as a hostage, as a living being. The empath then discovers a difficult spiritual truth. Not everyone will like the real you. Some preferred your mask, your compliance, your emotional overgiving. The authentic self threatens people who benefited from your self-neglect. And this hurts deeply at first, but eventually, freedom becomes more nourishing than approval ever was. Because false acceptance always demands a performance. Real connection never asks you to betray yourself. And maybe this is the final lesson hidden beneath the empath's dependence on others' opinions. Your sensitivity was never meant to imprison you. It was meant to awaken consciousness, to teach discernment, depth, inner truth, not emotional slavery. The empath does not heal by becoming cold. The empath heals by becoming internally anchored, feeling the emotions of the world without handing the world ownership over your soul. There is a stage in the empath's awakening where the old identity begins collapsing quietly. Not dramatically, not visibly, but internally, something sacred starts refusing to kneel anymore. You notice how exhausting it feels to constantly earn emotional permission to exist. How unnatural it is to monitor every word, every tone, every reaction around you. And for the first time, the empath asks a forbidden question. What if I am worthy even when someone misunderstands me? That question alone can shake an entire lifetime of conditioning. The empath then begins grieving versions of themselves that were never real. The endlessly patient version, the emotionally available version, the version that tolerated pain just to avoid disappointing others. You realize how many personalities were created for survival, how many smiles were protection mechanisms, how many acts of kindness secretly carried fear beneath them, fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of no longer being loved. And perhaps this grief is necessary, because you cannot become whole while worshiping the masks that destroyed your spirit. Carl Jung believed individuation begins the moment a person stops living according to collective expectations and begins listening to the deeper self. For the empath, this path feels terrifying, because your entire nervous system was trained outward, toward people, toward emotional atmospheres, toward approval. But now the soul pulls inward, toward silence, toward truth, toward the unfamiliar territory of self-trust. And self-trust feels strange at first when you spent years asking the world who you should be. Then comes the moment the empath stops over-explaining. A subtle transformation, almost invisible from the outside. You stop defending every boundary. Stop justifying every need. Stop begging others to understand your inner world before honoring it yourself. And suddenly something ancient inside you relaxes. Because the soul was never meant to live on trial. Not everyone must approve of your truth for it to be valid. Not everyone must understand your depth for it to be real. The empath finally stops confusing external agreement with inner worth. There are people who will leave once you stop emotionally shrinking for them. This can feel devastating at first, but slowly you understand. Those relationships were often connected not to your essence, but to your self-abandonment. Some loved your empathy, others loved your lack of boundaries. These are not the same thing, and the awakened empath learns to recognize the difference without bitterness. Not every loss is punishment. Sometimes it is the nervous system reclaiming peace. The final transformation of the empath is deeply quiet. You still feel deeply, still notice energies, still understand emotions others cannot explain. But now there is distance between what you feel and who you are. Other people's opinions stop entering your soul like commandments. You listen without surrendering yourself. You care without collapsing. You remain compassionate without becoming emotionally owned. This is not coldness. This is inner sovereignty. And perhaps the empath's greatest lesson was never about becoming liked by everyone. Perhaps it was about finally returning home to yourself after years of emotional exile, to speak without fear, to exist without apology, to disappoint people without believing you are unworthy. Because the deepest healing arrives the moment the empath realizes. The soul becomes strongest, not when everyone approves of it, but when it no longer abandons itself, to keep that approval alive. And maybe somewhere in these words, you recognized a hidden part of yourself that has been silent for too long. If this journey touched something deep inside you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may help another empath feel less alone. And subscribe to the channel if you're ready to explore the hidden psychology, awakening, and inner world of the empath even deeper. Thank you for watching.